journey together to learn more about writing success. So thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the incandescent Kalene Williams. This episode is brought to you by Tough Luck, a YA action adventure urban fantasy by Dean Floyd. And tonight we're talking about 5 ways to increase reader satisfaction. Now, there are lots of ways to increase reader satisfaction. There are probably as many ways as there are readers, which is loads and loads and loads of people out there. We're going to focus on 5, and the last one is quite subjective, so just hold on to your seats. It's going to be a wild ride. Hope you enjoy it. Tonight, our guest is Jason Winn, and this is his bio from Amazon. I did not write it. Jason has been writing since the mid-1700s when he was asked by the founding fathers to help him with a little document called the Declaration of Effing Independence. He spends his free time reading to blind kittens and consulting with fallen African dictators on how to use art as therapy. Aw, he hopes that one day he can give all this awesomeness up and just write novels, short fiction, and comics. So Jason, thank you and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, a little full disclosure about Jason. Jason is one of my clients. We met over the summer, and in the course of our interacting, we had a number of video chats. We were talking about writing, and I found them really encouraging. I think our first or second chat, I had some writer's block questions for you, Jason, and you totally broke through writer's block for me. Really great tips, and I was so pumped afterwards. I was like, woo, man, I hope this is how people feel when they listen to our show. Really excited afterwards to get back to writing. So that's when I knew I have to get Jason on the show, and tonight is the night. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to be your inspiration.
Jason, you write urban fantasy, and you're doing a space opera right now, and that's coming out when?
In the next 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know quite yet. We're getting there. It's been one little hiccup after another, as I'm sure every writer knows. So, arguing about a blurb or, waiting for something with the cover or the layout or whatever. So, yeah, it's been a million different little setbacks. So,
what's this new series about?
So it's 200 years in the future in a colonized solar system. So to simplify it, it's basically James Bond meets The Expanse. America has lost the first solar war, and this is 40 years later after they're sort of trying to rise up from the ashes, and a guy named Axel Nash, who's the main character, is pulled out of his retirement to go on a mission that seems like it's going to be a milk run, and obviously all hell breaks loose, and he's got to try to make it out alive. So, and it's the beginning of a deep series. I don't know how many we'll do, but it could be upwards of 10, 12 books.
Nice.
Yeah,
those are always fun.
Yeah.
That first book was a lot of fun, and then we just got done the second one.
Yep.
And while I was reading through this book, I was thinking, Jason, you've got a way of introducing something cool to the reader, like a cool idea, maybe a clue or something, and then giving them that cool thing. So it's introduce a cool thing and then give them that cool thing.
Yeah.
And throughout the book, all these little hooks that you kept on fulfilling, like promises you make the reader, and that you end up fulfilling those promises, made the reading experience really exciting, and the pages kind of just flew by. So then I was thinking, okay, we're having Jason on in 2 weeks, and I know exactly what I want to ask him about. I want to ask him about reader satisfaction. So that's kind of the genesis of tonight's show.
Sure.
Yeah. So guys, what do you think? What are some ways that some things authors can do that just in general increase reader satisfaction? And it could be movies too. What do fans love to see in movies or read in books? What are some across the board things that you see?
I would say number one for me would be a premise that I really want to be a part of, or a world that I really want to go to. And I think probably one of the biggest recent examples of that for me that everyone would know about is Ready Player One. From the first page of that book, I couldn't put the thing down. And I was on vacation at Disney World, and my wife is staying there like, "You're still reading that? And come on, we've got to go. We've got to go to Disney World." And like, yeah, okay, but I'm seriously, I just found another key. This is awesome. What would I do? I think that's really big, or a premise where you just sit and think like, what would I do in that respect? And for me, it always comes back to one movie, Brewster's Millions. The old Richard Pryor movie where he's got he has to spend $30 million in 30 days to get $300 million. And it's just like, oh my God, what would I do? How would I do that? He can't have any assets. He's got to get value for people's services. And so you sit there and endlessly ponder what you would do. I mean, it's a throwaway comedy from the 80s, but I think it's a brilliant premise.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, if it's, and I want to, oh God, all my thoughts just literally vanish out of my freaking brain.
That happens. Reader satisfaction, things that we love.
Yeah. So I was just going to add thoughts. Come back to me thoughts. A lot of people get hung up on the, I want to be original. And, they don't want to have like the cookie cutter ideas, but, spicing up something that people are already familiar with, video games, and then you add in your own twist to that. I mean, that's another way that you can hook readers. You give them something that's familiar, something that they, already have, downloaded in their brain masses, and go from there.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to talk about later is tropes. Certain genres have tropes that readers expect to find, and maybe they don't consciously expect to see it there, but if it's missing, they're going to be like, oh, that movie or that book was okay, but it just wasn't quite what I was looking for, and they might not even know why. So we're going to try to cover some of those tonight so we can help you as the author think through your plot, and maybe it'll give you a new idea for something you hadn't had in mind before, but you find is just perfect for your story.
I would like to say that to the writers who just want to do something original, I think that's a great point. Is you get really hung up on I want to do something original, and then you've just completely caromed off of writing to market. My first series, I thought it was great. It was Harry Potter meets Breaking Bad, and it's a girl who becomes a magical drug dealer. She's hilarious. Not magical. She's dealing in magical drugs to sorcerers, because I've always been fascinated by characters who are on the peripheral of sort of the main action. Like, who doesn't want to know what a contractor's life is in Star Wars is like, when they're trying to build a Death Star, to go back to Clerks. So I decided to have somebody who was a supplier to all the sorcerers. And, of course I love the book because I wrote it, but there's 3 of them now, but it didn't really catch on. It didn't set the world on fire. So I think I was trying to be too kind of outside the box and too outside of the genre, because urban fantasy does not deal with stuff like that. So that was a hard lesson to learn, but it put me much more on track for the new series of being much more closer to known tropes, especially like all the beats that are in James Bond movies or current space operas.
Well, the big trouble for authors is connecting with those readers on Amazon. And if you're a reader on Amazon searching for your next book, you're searching for something really specific. You've got something in mind. Like, if I'm looking for fantasy, I'm probably looking for dragons and magic. And I probably do want that orphan, that's rejected by society, that somehow finds this magic piece or somehow is the key to the universe. Like, I want another book like that kind of book that I've loved so much. And those are all tropes, right? Those are, standard fantasy tropes that a fantasy author might say, hey, I want to write something different, but I'm the reader and I'm looking for something. Are you going to give me that thing I'm looking for, or are you going to give me something that's like the second cousin to it?
I mean, you almost shoot yourself in the foot when you read something great like Game of Thrones. The reason it was great is because Martin was one of the first to do it and blow up. Yeah, he blew up because of the TV show, but you go out there and try to find something that's just like it and gives you that same feeling. It turns out that, like, you find a lot that kind of get you there, but never really kind of get you all the way there. And no, I'm not going to read Wheel of Time. So
sorry.
It's too long. Yeah, sorry. People recommend that all the time.
And also, like, another thing is the language that you use. There's different tonal values in like all the different genres. Like, fantasy, it just has this feel when you're reading it as far as how the words are put together, and it's far different from the way a romance reads, which is even more different than a military in the sci-fi world. They all have, this, I hear it kind of like in music. It has a tonal value as different as different musics from classic to pop to country. It's all sound, it all sings, but they sound different. And, if you can find that tonal value in the genre that you're writing for, that's another great way to reach that reader, because, that's, the sound they're looking for as well, if any of that made sense at all.
Yeah, it's the emotional connection to the music that you feel. I mean, somebody who's really moved by a country song is not going to be moved, well, sometimes by, an aria from Don Giovanni. I mean, my wife likes different music than I do, and I get nothing out of what she likes, but she also gets nothing out of what I like. So I think same goes for stories as well. It's the same thing, or movies.
It's the whole thing, all of it.
Yeah, well, if Don Giovanni told a good story, I think a lot of country fans would like it, because a lot of country fans love country. They love this.
They like Italian opera.
That's a good story. Yeah, it's compelling. I don't know. Maybe it could be. Okay, so we came up with 4 things, and then the last thing is, here's some subjective catch-alls, but 4 main things that readers are looking for in books. And the first one I was thinking of is they want a plot where you've got these different threads of plot and they come together in really cool ways. When readers are in the middle of the book and they see those threads come together in the center of a scene, or especially at that climax, and then at the resolution at the end, readers just love that. On the other hand, when you've got plot threads that seem to have no connection, or scenes that have no importance to the overall plot and go nowhere, they can find that frustrating and be asking themselves, well, why did I read all that? What was the point of that? So what do you guys think? How can an author do that? Come up with all these different plots and then find ways to kind of orchestrate them together in a single scene. How can they do that?
I don't mean to step on anybody else. That is really difficult. And I think what you have to do is start with the intersections where you want something to happen, where you want people to come together. And then, if you're new to doing intertwining plots, I think what you need to do is do, beginning, middle, and end, and you keep it simple at first. And you have, I'll stick with Game of Thrones reference. You have the whole families are all together in the beginning, right? And then they all sort of spread out, and then it takes forever, but they finally kind of come back together, and they would have if you'd ever finished reading the books. I could go on an hour about that, but I won't. And so you have this sort of beginning, and then they come to crash together at one point, and then they kind of go away again, and they come back together again. And so I think if you plan out what those are, and for me, like military sci-fi, it's based around action or major plot points. Okay, okay, I want to have this thing happen. Now the problem is that elastic part that's going to hold those two intersections together, and it's like, okay, well, how can I build and then get back to these points and make these two come together? That's really hard. I mean, I find that the only way to build that is through an outline. Full disclosure, I am a fierce outliner. I don't know how you pantsters do it. God bless you if you can, but it's not me. And so
sheer willpower.
Yeah. Hey, it's magic. Although some of the greatest writers were pantsters, but creating those elastic bonds between those intersections, I think, is tough. And the easiest way to do it is with an outline. And I think a big thing for every author to remember is it's your story. That's your canvas. You can do anything you want. I have to constantly remind myself, like, there's no rule here. I can have these guys do whatever I want to get them to this point. It just has to make sense within the rules of the world.
That's a good point.
Yeah, sorry, we were a little distracted because we were looking at the chat. And Jason,
our chat's always distracting.
Really excellent point. And I'm like, Rick said, I used to pants. And Rick says, it just took a long time. Yeah, pantsing your way through the plot might mean that when you get to the revising stage, you end up kind of revising things. But I like what you were saying about reverse engineering your plot.
You have to do that.
Starting with those really cool moments that you want to build up to and figuring out how to get to them.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got that inspiration from watching a documentary on one of the Uncharted games. I've never played them, but I've seen some production diaries on them, and it was great. It was real quick. They just said, we want to get a huge cruise ship in the middle of the desert. And I'm like, that is awesome. And they're like, but the challenge was, how in the hell do we make this happen? And I love thinking about things in that regard. It's like, I really want to have, some crazy thing happen. Okay, how do we make that happen? And it just becomes a series of problems you have to solve in order to get to that result. And a really solid outline is going to be how you do that. Or you sit over a cauldron and do your black magic pantster stuff. I don't know. I can't give any advice on that one. Sorry. Go watch interviews with Tom Clancy. He was a pantster.
Yeah, we're going to have Larry Brooks on the show next week, and he has the book Story Engineering and Story Physics. And in Story Physics, he talks about you can write your whole book, and then when you get to the revising stage, look at your scenes, look how they work in the overall plot, and find better ways. You might need to change out scenes. You might need to change out chapters to make them fit into that plot even more. You might find ways that those plot threads can connect even better. So perhaps if you're a pantser, it's just, get the manuscript done and then put it aside. And then when you come back to it, take a second look and look for new ways to make those threads come together. And it might mean you have to rewrite scenes, you might need to rewrite whole sections, but there are even better plot points and plot turns and twists that you can make if you keep pushing yourself.
Yeah. And timing becomes a real problem in that scenario too. Like, you got to make sure the people are in the spot at the time that they need them to be there. So you sometimes keeping notes of when a certain thing happens in a certain time, days become issues, hours, minutes sometimes. Yeah. So
I mark down, like, if there's days, hours going by, I'm like, okay, it took them this long here. And then in chapter 3, it's got to be at least 5 days. Because one time I had a 10-year missing period of time. It was never written. It was something that happened in the past before the story was going on, but I needed to know what happened in that 10 years in order for what was happening currently to make any freaking sense at all. So that was a scramble. And I wanted to also add, one of the ways that I work through kind of tying in the plot threads is through the dialogue. So what the characters are talking about, what they're discussing, be it either the main thing that's going on, or you have a moment of character building where you get to know the character, and it might not have anything to do with the plot at all. It's just about them. And then I fill in the other details after. So if the conversation as a whole, is moving forward in a way that makes sense, then all of the descriptions I put in between will just strengthen that. So that's one way that I handle that.
All right, we had a question here from Bill Frisbee. And what about plot going into sequels?
So, hey, Bill, those are called looping plot lines. If you know, and you can plant that type of stuff throughout your first book. We'll just say this is part of a trilogy. You can plant that stuff really anywhere. There's no rule against it doing that. The kicker is you're going to have to tie it up eventually. So if you're going to do like a fixed number of books, just make sure that you're going to be able to conclude this stuff. If you are going to write 10, 12, 20 books that are all in the same series, you can keep those things going forever. That's one of Michael Anderle's point that he made early on in his career, is he said that looping plot lines were great because they're always going to really keep the reader coming back. He talks about a bar that these guys were going to start, and, so he forgot, and then like 2 books later, it's like, oh yeah, I got to have them open up this bar, and so on. So you can do it. It can be with really anything, character relationships. I mean, I've got looping plot lines in my new series to carry them on. They looping plot lines tend to be like this sort of connective tissue between multiple books, and it'll help people remember, what happened in the past, sort of thing. So I'm all for it. Definitely do it. Just try to have a plan to either continue it for as long as you need or wrap it up.
All right, Barnett today says, I've had to rearrange scenes as plot threads unfold as I'm writing. And to add on to your point about living, just call it living plot lines or moving?
Looping
plot lines is if you're doing
rapid loop between.
Yeah. If you're doing a rapid release schedule, so you've got 3 manuscripts ready to go before you start publishing the first one. That if your third book, you need to make a plot change in book 1, you can do that, right? Because you haven't published it yet. So that's kind of fun. William Joseph Robert says, I use a wall of sticky notes.
You talking about this back here? I'll brag real quick. That is a map of my epic series that I'm going to write probably next year. And those are actually city names that are in the book, so I could kind of see where they are in relation to the world.
Right.
Very important.
Yeah, it's a big 20-foot wall, and I felt like doing something with it.
Yeah, might as well. It's inspiration too.
Yes, here in my magical dungeon.
Okay, so what else do we have to add on to plot threads coming together? Readers really enjoy when plot threads start coming together. One point I was thinking of is readers like to be right. They like to be reading your book and picking up clues and be guessing about what's going to happen next, be guessing about what the answer to the mystery is. And when you come up with a scene where their guesses can lead to the answer, they enjoy that feeling of being right.
I would say in some cases I would agree with that, but in others, like, George R. R. Martin's #1 rule is surprise me. And so, and obviously he's a big fan of doing that in his own work. So I think that if you can write, or a twist, you can write that kind of stuff into your work. Yeah. Okay. Having them be right some of the time, but I wouldn't give it to them all the time. If they can figure it out, then what was the point of writing your murder mystery?
Well,
I do like the ones where, like, I think it's going like, oh no, this is totally going to happen. Okay. And you can feel it's getting to that point and you're just like, no.
Yeah.
I like those.
The mom killed them all. Oh no, it wasn't the son.
It's still consistent within the plot. It's still consistent within the characters. It didn't come out of thin air. It's not a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, you can't have that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely make it make sense. But if it can be like they think it's going to be something else, but then it ends up being.
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson's rule for that is surprising yet satisfying. So, by the way, his YouTube series on writing is amazing. I highly recommend it to anybody. Camera Panda, for whatever reason, sponsored it, but it's his entire class from BYU.
Yeah, I think I've seen it like 3 times.
Yeah,
It's that good. You watch it over and over again.
Yeah, it's top notch and free, which is crazy.
Surprising but inevitable end conclusion. So the pieces are all there, but yet it's a twist that the reader hadn't seen coming. I like that. Yeah, it's good. Okay, next up, we like really strong characters. Oh, was that in there? Characters. We love characters. That's another thing that readers connect to. What do we love about characters?
Well, I think that was my note that you read.
Okay, yeah.
Characters that you that you either want to hang out with or fall in love with. And I don't write romance, so I cannot speak on making characters that somebody would fall in love with, but I try to write characters that you'd at least want to drink a beer with. If there's no anchor to your characters, then how am I going to develop a connection with them? This sort of tired trope of, you have to have flawed characters. Well, not really. I mean, they don't have to be flawed so much as you just have to like them and root for them. I mean, Luke Skywalker isn't really flawed. Somebody's going to shout at me for saying that, but whatever. I'm sticking to it, man. but Han Solo is. But people love and root for Luke Skywalker, and why not? He's a great character. And so if you can create characters that are either lovable or like that guy looks really cool, I want to hang out with him, or she seems really sweet, I'd like to do something with her, whatever. That's going to be something that readers will connect with, I think. If they're just bland cardboard nothing characters with no depth to them, depth is huge, then nobody's going to care about them, nobody's going to root for them, and they're not going to turn the page.
Kaylee, what do you think? What do you look for in characters?
I like the ones that, I mean, you can definitely tell they're unique to themselves. From the first page that by the ways that they talk, things that they say, how they're responding to other characters around them. If it starts to feel like all the characters are sounding the same, then I have no one to really, like you're saying, cling to. And then it becomes a giant mush ball in my head because everybody sounds the same, they're reacting the same. So giving them like their own, quirks, those can also be flaws. A person who picks at their nails, right? And then another character is just totally disgusted by that. And, that's really not going to have anything to do with the dragon that they're fighting. But it's like, dude, will you please quit chewing on your thumb? And it's like do it when I'm nervous. So it's little things like that you can add in that, can give that spice to your characters. It feels more realistic. Like it's a real conversation happening. And, what would you be doing if you're going up against a dragon? I'd probably be pulling at my hair, but
So authors, how do you do that? How do you come up with characters that are unique unto themselves and that readers can really connect with? How do you come up with them in your brain and hear their voices as you write? How do you do that?
I do a technique I call personality mapping. So I think it's hard for anybody to create a character out of just whole cloth. I mean, I don't. That's very difficult. So what I do is I'll take unique people in my own life, and what I'll do is then map their personality traits on top of the character that I'm developing. So in my first series, what I did was one of the villains. I wanted him to be sort of non-conventional. So he's this sort of goofy professor type, and I modeled him after my real estate agent of all people because he had this very, very distinct personality. He was, in the way he carried himself when he walked, to the way his speech pattern was, to the way that he used weird, almost like 1849ers minor technology, speech, sayings and stuff. So I took him because I knew this guy. I mean, I'd hung out with him a bunch, and he was very, very imprinted on me. So I just put his entire personality on top of this really horrible villain. And so I ended up with a really unique character who would kill people and make, this sort of snide joke about it. And it didn't bother him at all. He was completely, just numb to it all. So I do that with a lot of characters because they'll be based on somebody that I really, really know well, or some character that I've followed, like Walter White. You could take a character like him and just you copy his mannerisms and his speech and the little stuff. You don't copy everything he says, but if I think that's an easy cheat code for people that are struggling with creating characters is, if your uncle was really weird and not, evil, but just strange, and he had strange mannerisms, then take all of those because you know the guy and put him on top of a character. And what would he say in this situation? What would he do in this situation? Did he have a weird way of scratching his head because he only did it with his pinky? Weird stuff like that. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, quirky things about your character that you can add.
Yeah, and you know it, so you would know how to apply it, and it's consistent. That's the other piece, and keeping that character consistent throughout the story is a challenge, and unless you know them really well.
This is one of those things that you were telling me back when I had Roadblock in July or August. Writer's block. I'm sorry, Roadblock.
Brain roadblock.
Brain roadblock. I was telling you, I've got 30,000 words to write this month, which is actually quite doable. A lot of our audience does that, but for me, that's a huge amount. And you said two things. One is don't make up characters out of thin air, base them off people you know. And two, you told me dictation. Go get a device and dictate.
Yeah.
I tried a little bit of the second piece, but the big breakthrough for me was I took the keystroke medium hosts that I work with and I put them in my book that I'm writing. And
my character. Ooh.
I came up with so many scenes and just built on my plot, totally fleshed it out because of that one piece of advice. You kind of wrote half my book for me.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. I need co-author credit.
Yeah, that's right. So Josh Hayes, you're in the chat right now. You're also in my book. So because
and I want to add when I'm writing, I'm extremely visual. So, I mean, I can play the movies in my head and see them like I'm looking at you guys right now. So when I'm writing characters, I literally play that scene out in my head. I physically imagine whatever room or world that they're in. We have one character right now. She's a little bit more bouncy. And sometimes when I'm writing, I'll actually start to bounce because I'm thinking about her and like how she might be moving and stuff. And when I'm writing dialogue, sometimes I actually, I might actually try to, why would you do that? I will act it out. So, but I mean, that's something that I do to try and get into the character's head so that, each one doesn't end up sounding the same.
Yeah, there's authors that'll tell you to like literally talk out your dialogue as they write them.
Sometimes it depends on the dialogue.
I don't do it, but it works for some people. I forget the guy's name that I'm thinking of right now, but.
Well, we are about half
yes.
the show. Would we like to do a sponsor read?
Yes. Let me get that up.
And after this sponsor read, we're going to talk about pacing, fulfilling promises to the readers, humor, and some more. The rule of cool. We have to talk about the rule of cool.
Okay, wait. I have to move. Hang on. I have to move this because that is going to cover it. Sorry. All right. There we go. Alrighty. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Tough Luck, a YA action-adventure urban fantasy saga of the Shamrock Samurai. Book 1 by Dean Floyd. How many shotgun blasts does it take to kill a Banshee? Sean O'Farrell is supposed to be lucky. If you couldn't tell by the name, he's Irish. Irish-American, that is. He's only had the bad kind of luck lately. Sean's just a normal high school graduate struggling at being a young adult. In the meantime, he's juggling homework, a possible girlfriend, a chaos wizard, and a screaming Banshee. If Sean doesn't stop the Banshee, she might not only kill him, but his mom and kid brother too. Luckily, Sean's got a samurai sword, his dad's old gun, a 69 fastback, and possibly a little magic. Check it out! Click the link of doom. That was for you, Josh. Yay!
All right, so we are going back to, we talked about characters. Let's talk about pacing. So we talked about how plot threads come together in a nice way, and that's a whole lot of fun. Pacing, part of what pacing is what you leave out. I mean, a lot of it is getting to the fun stuff quickly, but a lot of that means not doing the boring stuff. So what are some things that authors might want to put in their book for whatever reason, feel needs to be in their book for whatever reason, but readers would rather they just kind of skipped?
I mean, you got to remember, there's two great quotes on this. One is Hitchcock, which is, he says that movies are life with the boring bits taken out.
Just taking it out.
Yeah. And the other one is Margaret Atwood, who says, your job as a writer is to hide the exposition. So, the real magic in storytelling and writing, I think, is to just tell what actually happened in the story. That's it. You don't go telling them what color the checkout person's pants were. You don't tell them what kind of music was playing at the checkout, self-checkout. You don't talk about how much gas was in the car or any of that. Like, none of that matters. Just keep it to what was pertinent to the story. And, and you can think about, Star Wars. I mean, when the Star Destroyer chases down Tantive 4, do you know what the pilots are doing in the Star Destroyer? Like, what was going on in the break room? Like, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that Darth Vader confronts Princess Leia and says, "Take her away," and a couple of the bits of dialogue, and that's it. So, yes, and music is very important. John Williams is the man. Totally agree, Rick. So the key to writing, I think, in like a novel, is to only focus on the action and the sort of inner monologue of the characters and the most pertinent of details. If they walk into a room and sit down at a table, you don't need to know there's bookshelves all over the place. You don't need to know what's outside the window. You certainly don't need to know what the weather's like. You don't need to know any of that stuff. Keep it out. You don't need it. Throw it away. It might be important to you, but it's not important to the reader.
Right. If it's not important to the scene you're trying to build as part of the conflict, the main plot, the conflict of that scene as it fits into the conflict of the overall story. So if you're trying to figure out if a detail is needed for the story or not and what that means, for me, I kind of keep going back to the conflict. What's the central conflict of the story? And then how does this scene, this chapter fit into that? What's the conflict here in this particular scene? And how can I get back to it? I'm getting off topic, just cut it. It's not needed.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to Shadow the Illustrator had a question, like, how do you know if your pacing is too slow? First of all, if you're not excited about what you're writing, it's probably too slow. So there's one little rule of thumb. But if you find like characters repeating points, or again, if you're describing stuff that is not immediately concerning the action of the scene or the world building. So I always say, like, my chapters are either moving the plot forward or character development / world building, and that's it. That's the only thing that should be happening in your book. And you can look at books that are, George R.R. Martin thickness. Get my hand up there. Yeah, that there's not a wasted word in his stuff. The early stuff. Later on, it's a different matter. He had no editor. But same thing with J.K. Rowling and the first Harry Potter book. I mean, that's some sparing prose right there. She's not going on and on and on, but it's the choice of the words and how, the brevity of her writing that's so important, in that, she's got the vocabulary when she writes to take you right into this scene, this incredibly magical world. You go back and look at the length of Harry Potter 1, it's like 57,000 words, I think. Like, that is a tiny novel, and that launched an insane franchise, and everybody wanted to read her book. And I could go on forever about her success and her story, but it's the trick is your vocabulary. Another one is using stronger verbs was a great piece of advice that I was given years ago. He didn't go across the room; he flew across the room. He crashed across the room. Get a thesaurus, you can find more examples, but really focusing on your verbs is I think a very important little trick for writers to keep their pacing moving, is having those verbs help describe the action. It's a good cheat code.
Right. Anthony DeMarco says, like Chekhov's gun, don't mention the weather unless it comes into play later in the scene.
Amen. So
just for our audience who hasn't heard of Chekhov's gun, who would like to tell us what Chekhov's gun is and how it applies to pacing?
Do I get to show a gun?
Sure. Oh, yes. Yeah. Kalene can show her sword.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
so you gotta have. Okay, there we go. Little
trigger discipline.
Yeah, of course. Chekhov's gun is any item that you would show in a scene, like you make a big deal out of the scene, and you don't ever reference it again. So there's plenty of movie examples for it, but it's usually in bad movies. But I can't remember. There was a gangster movie I saw one time. I can't remember the name of it, where the kid gets a gun, literally gets a gun at one point. The gun never shows up ever again in the movie, ever again. And it's like, that was an entirely wasted scene. I mean, you're paying millions of dollars to make a film. It's a 2-hour movie. You got limited time, and you like they spent 2 or 3 minutes of screen time showing how this guy goes and buys this sort of raggedy old gun. Yes, it's airsoft, Rick. China, let's see, classic Army M4 SEAL model, by the way. And so the whole this scene in the movie is completely wasted, and there's no point in having it. And so you as a writer need to always remember that. If you look at James Bond movies, I love James Bond, by the way. Sean Connery's the man. You'll see that Q gives him gadgets. He always uses the gadgets. Like there's never a wasted gadget. Like I can't name one time where he's been given gadgets and he doesn't use them. And that's sort of a thing that I use in my writing is like I won't give the gadgets to my main character until I go write myself into a corner. And then what I'll do is I'll circle back to the time when he gets all of his stuff, and I'm like, oh yes, of course he's going to get a special kind of knife here that allows him to win the fight. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, well we have that now, so it's not a problem anymore. So
yeah, those are the things that as the reader you're like, oh, that was so cool how that came in. But as the author, maybe in your first draft, it's not there at all. It's not until you're getting like 3/4 of the way through the book that you're like, wow, I really need that. So then you go and stick it in on page 20, and it's there to be used later. And that makes that cool effect. Yeah,
I used to do it in the reverse way. I would kind of load them up with either characters or events or plot points, and then what I would do is like realize that at the end of the book I didn't use them, so I didn't need them, so I'd have to go back and strip them out. So now what I'll kind of do is put little placeholders, and if I need to circle back around to write myself out of a plot hole or corner, what I'll do is I'll just go and add those characters in the beginning. So that's the thing is like when you're writing a novel, it's kind of this sort of upward. You're sort of building a hill accidentally, and then what you have to do is kind of go back and fill in and make it a level sort of foundation. You kind of liken it to sand filling up the wrong way, and then you come back and fill it up and top it off when you go back to the beginning because you have all these plot points that you created that you have to fix.
Yeah. All right. So to circle back to pacing. Pacing, a lot of what it is what you're taking out. You're taking out anything that kills reader satisfaction, like details that don't matter or scenes that don't apply to the plot. Scenes that don't conflict or the characters. Scenes that don't push the story forward. They don't contribute to the plot. Scenes lacking conflict. Like if there's no conflict in the scene, that's a great candidate for cutting it. Also, you might consider cutting lengthy descriptions. Maybe that description could be a whole lot shorter and we can get to the action and the fun stuff. Lengthy dialogue. A lot of authors find that dialogue is easy to write. It's easy to write conversations because you've got those two characters in your head. So it's easy for those voices to come out, and then you write your whole book and you find out that 3/4 of your draft is just conversation and meeting. Maybe those dialogues need to be shortened. Maybe you need to think about some other elements that need to be brought into your story. So if you've got a very long conversation between two characters, that could be a scene to take a look at, maybe to shorten. And then, of course, the one that readers all hope we authors can cut down on is info dumps.
Oh no, you have to have those. Like 2 full chapters about your world.
You will listen to these 3 chapters of my tree.
I've thought about how cool this castle is for 5 years. I need to tell you everything about it.
No, don't do that.
Drop.
Yeah, drop.
I've read a book, and I love this author, but it was every freaking chapter was in-depth detail about these rocks in these caverns, and I'm like, enough already.
But they're really cool rocks.
Right.
All right. Chuck Maley makes 2 really great points in his comment. He says, how would you say genre affects these rules? And he put that in quotes. Some historical fiction types love these big descriptions. Okay, we should just say off bat, we said this earlier, but we'll say it again. These are not gospel truths. We are not speaking, here are the rules from on high. All this is subjective. I mean, a lot of readers agree about this kind of stuff, but these aren't rules. These are guidelines, and these are what we kind of like. Yeah,
I mean, if you're writing like a hot, steamy romance, you're probably going to need to go into detail about them pecs and all the other things. Yeah, if you're writing some kind of adventure time travel novel, going into a bit more detail of what the world is like around the characters and how they're interacting with it, could really push things forward, because it's going to be so different from where they were before. Definitely in like the historical ones. I loved learning about in which was Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. I loved learning how the churches and all that stuff were built. They dug down deep, deep as tall as the building was going to be, and then they filled it in with rock, and then they started building on top of that. And then there was this giant pin needle thing that they used to mark the line so everything was straight. I thought that was really cool, but that was that type of book. And also he did it in a really good way. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, details, that doesn't, subjective.
Yeah, Rick Partlow says Tom Clancy once wrote a long chapter on the instant between the ignition and explosion of an atomic bomb. That
Song of All Fears. Was it Song of All Fears, Rick?
I can see how a climactic moment like that would be really cool to kind of spin out and get deep into. Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. My favorite parts of that book are actually when he goes off topic on those bunny trails. And one of my favorite pieces is when he does that scene on the boat where the prisoner falls off, and that character is not in the book at all. It's just that one chapter, but the chapter is so heartbreaking and beautiful. It's one of my favorite pieces from literature.
Yeah, that was back when they got paid by the word from the newspapers. So
we have KU today, so maybe it can work. But Rick, great points. We also have lots of other great points. Guy Anthony DeMarco, he says, if you really want to do an info dump, you could try doing it as you know, Bob, kind of conversation between. Okay.
Or commit the other atrocious sin, which is having two characters who know something have a conversation, like they both know the same thing. Like, you're my brother, like they do in horrible TV shows and the pilot episodes all the time.
Art of Today says you can have descriptions or elements that do not relate to the plot if they do well to show a character's personality or add comedy. Comedy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the first point, 100%. And those can still relate to the plot, but you can kind of cheat a little bit. I would agree by doing that.
All right, we need to move on because of pacing, and we've got 12 minutes left to the show. So fulfilling promises to the readers, that's another thing that audiences really love, is when you've got a promise set up for your readers and then you fulfill that. But that's a really vague statement. So what does that mean to promise something to your readers and then fulfill it? What does that mean in terms of book writing or plotting or whatnot?
I think that's pretty genre, relating to the genre. So I had a film teacher. I'm a film school dropout. I still remember his name too, Jim. And he said, films have to fulfill a promise. This is like almost the exact same lines of this, and it's pretty funny. He goes, you watch an Indiana Jones movie, and right at the end when he gets the Ark, how would you feel as the viewer if a spaceship just came down? And this is years before Crystal Skull came out. It turns out that Indiana Jones did have a stupid spaceship at the end of it. So that's why Crystal Skull is so bad. And so, his point was you can't set everybody up thinking that there's going to be, like, say, this sort of large biblical event happening at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And instead, you literally have a spaceship come down and pick up the Ark and go off with it. You can't do that in any genre and get away with it. You can't, Game of Thrones couldn't end with them all on a newscast. I know these are sort of examples, but the idea is Star Wars had to end with a big space battle. You knew it was coming. You knew they had to have it. They had to go and take out the Death Star. And so you're fulfilling the promise to the viewer in that case that there's this, there's always this talk of this big space station, so we have to have a battle to blow it up. And go on and on and on. And you only see this work a lot in successful movies for a reason, because it works in that they stayed with the genre. Heat is a great example of payoff because you have the protagonist and the antagonist make it out to the airport, and you've got, spoiler alert, Robert Downey Jr. Not Robert Downey Jr., but Robert De Niro and Al Pacino having a gun battle right at the end. It's a battle of wits of who's better. And so that to me is reader payoff, staying within the rules of the genre and getting a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, and in that last example, you're also promising the reader, with your characters, here are two characters that are very intelligent. Here are two characters who are clever, who think outside the box, and they're skilled with guns. So when the reader's seeing scenes that hint at all that, they're hoping for, maybe not consciously, but they're looking for that scene where those two characters are going to be fighting each other and using their skills, using their wits in one scene. They're waiting for that scene to come, and then you give it to them.
Yeah, and you get it in the middle with the bank robbery. But as is standard with the protagonist and antagonist, it's a draw. So that's the whole point, is like, and you can go to Attack of the Clones, and it's Obi-Wan versus Jango Fett. So that fight is fought to a draw, and you can go on and on and on and on, where you see hero versus protagonist in a sort of action setting. The second meeting will always be to a draw. And whether it's nature that breaks them up, or circumstance that breaks them up, or, the villain has to win that one through his wits. He gets away, so the hero doesn't get his man in the bank robbery scene. So, that's coming. And I want to say something about capable characters. Like I think people really identify with capable characters, like that can really get it done. Indiana Jones is a good example of that. I wanted to say that earlier, but I think that's a big thing for writers, is like, if you're going to write a hero, he's got to be very capable. It's skilled in something.
And he can certainly grow in capability, like, Bill.
Yeah, if it's a hero's journey, yeah, sure.
Of The Hobbit, he's got certain capabilities, but he has a whole lot of weaknesses. But his weaknesses become strengths by the end. But again, that's something that readers enjoy seeing. And you can think back to the last movies or books that you really didn't like. For me, it could be that the main character is frustrating for some reason. One of the reasons might be that they're just incapable, or just not skilled, or whatever.
What would be an example of one of those movies you hated?
Well, I really did not enjoy Gone with the Wind. Now, Scarlett, she's
come on, that's like an 80-year-old movie. You can't bring that one up.
Scarlett's capable in a lot of ways, but she's also very frustrating. And one of the things that makes her frustrating is her personality, and the way she treats people makes her socially inept, or at least
self-defeating.
Yeah, self-defeating. Yeah, just very frustrating throughout the whole book. Just wanted to be good.
The characters who never seem to have any of an idea for themselves, or they start to develop that idea for themselves, whatever kind of problem it is that they have, to fix it, but then they don't do anything about it. It's like, all you had to do is this thing that you said that you needed to do, and you're not doing it, and then you never change. Those characters drive me absolutely batty.
Yes, I would say we must flush them. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so going back to fulfilling promises to readers, they're genre-specific payoffs, so we kind of covered that. So with romance readers really expect a happily ever after. That's kind of the classic genre payoff people are looking for. In a mystery, you want the mystery to be solved. In mil sci-fi, a lot of our audience is military science fiction. What are some things? This genre is a little less explored, I think, by editors out there. You can find a whole lot of books on romance, mystery, and adventure, but not a whole lot at this point on science fiction and military science fiction. So real quick, what are some things that readers are looking for and expecting in military science fiction?
Well, I think one of the glowing examples of that in film is Aliens. That is probably the number one military sci-fi. I do not agree that Starship Troopers is better than Aliens. Fight me. I think what they're looking for is to see a military force that's going up against something that is clearly and obviously stronger than the military force or the protagonist that's going after it. That's key in almost all action fiction. You have to have the antagonist is clearly going to beat the protagonist. I mean, they're so powerful you can't imagine how on earth are they going to beat it. And then the trick to you as the writer is to figure out that way that they can win. I mean, if you want to talk about tropes, I think war weariness is a pretty common one in military sci-fi, where these guys have been through a lot, they've seen a lot, man. One more job. They hate what they have to do, but they do it because they have a sense of honor and duty to each other.
Yeah, honor, duty. Those are all huge, and they love their guns. They want to know about them, and clips versus magazines.
But it has to matter. It has to matter in the plot.
Yeah.
We want the gun details, we want the weapon details, we want the ship details, but it has to matter in some conflict where your knowledge of the guns and your knowledge of the weaponry helps you to survive and to win and defeat the bad guy, and not just be there for the sake of being there.
Yeah, I mean, and also, it has to be within the world's rules. You can't do any ex machina. A hard ass sergeant, that's always a big one too. Yeah.
And these aren't rules, they're just suggestions.
Yeah. And gun porn, lots of gun porn. Yes.
But they do love their guns.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have tons of them.
I'm learning so much about them. The Tau 27. We've got a little pixie girl that carries one of those around. It's hilarious because she's tiny and it's gigantic.
We have so much debate over Starship Troopers right now in chat.
I wonder if people like the book, because that book is a conundrum to me. It does so well. Do you guys like the book Starship Troopers? I'm asking the guys in the chat.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, you're asking him like I haven't read it.
We have William Joseph Roberts saying, "Love David Weber's writing." I shouldn't be mispronouncing his name. Sorry, can't stand the physics info dumps.
Book was awesome. I just read the book for the first time, so I was wondering what other guys thought of it.
All right, Chuck Family says the book was okay. Movie was a movie.
Never finished. I'm hearing a meh from some of these guys. Okay, sorry, I hijacked it. I just wanted to know what people thought.
All right, so
that's the chat. All their shenanigans.
I know these guys are great.
All right, so we want genre-specific payoffs, and there are a lot of different specific tropes for that. We also want humor. What are you looking for with humor?
I mean, I think the easy thing with humor is sarcasm. You have to think about, and humor is really subjective and tricky. So sarcasm tends to be, I think, the easy way out. Having two characters that like hate each other but have to work together, so they're throwing insults at one another. Bringing up when one of them screwed up before and never letting them live it down, kind of thing. So, humor's tough. I think it's probably best to approach humor last when you're drafting, like, because you usually have to think about it. I mean, one of the great points that the writer of Archer makes is that he said he wanted write a character that was super funny and could pick up chicks, kind of thing. I think that was a quote. But he goes back to say that it took him forever to write some of the episodes because he had to think about what the snappy comebacks would be, because they're brilliant and they look like somebody would have just come up with them on the fly. But just remember, that guy probably sat in a room for 12 hours writing that one 30-minute script, which was actually probably 22 minutes, and all the snappy comebacks and all that. So it's tough to write that kind of thing. It'd be clever.
It might be a matter of like letting yourself go a little bit, like with your writing, instead of trying to come up with something brilliant, come up with something hilarious, but just to write, to get it out, and then hit you, they hit you, and if not, you can come back and put it in the revising stage.
You just got to do the whole all writing is rewriting. The magic happens in the editing with
We're
the
not
wonderful editor.
virgins. We can go back and fix it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're not writing the final draft. You're writing a draft. You're gonna have to fix it.
Rick Partlow says, "Oh yeah, sarcasm. That's always such a great freaking idea."
Yeah, word.
And Guy Anthony DeMarco says, "Comic relief characters are fun." Can we talk about that for a moment? Why comic relief is amazing.
The show?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
How it can work in your plot. What is comic relief, and how can you use it?
I don't use it, and I am by no means an expert on it.
That is not true. You do.
Do I? I don't. Did
He's an
anything I write
accidental
funny?
comic reliever.
Something I wrote was funny.
It's when you have intense moments in your plot, like maybe something really sad is going on. Maybe we're in the middle of a dark time. Maybe our characters are going through pain, and then something funny happens, or there's that character who always says that thing in that situation. And
Right.
Bill's saying. So especially in military science fiction, you've got that gallows humor, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you got, the villain's got a gun on two guys. And the guy's like, "Hey, Bill, remember that $5 I owe you? Here you go." He pays his buddy right before they get shot. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. It's a releasing of the tension. It's a releasing of the pressure. And sometimes, that humor, like right before death or whatever, right in the middle of pain, can be so poignant to the reader. I read a quote the other day, and it says, "Laughter gives you distance. It enables you to step back from the situation and to process it, and then to go back into it again." And for your reader, it can do that too. You're in the middle of a tense moment in the plot and a tense moment in the conflict. It allows them to kind of step back for a moment and then to go back into it again.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is Generation Kill, the HBO series. It was actually based on a book, but there's a lot of examples of that in that series. I mean, they just are merciless to each other in the unit, and even making all kinds of jokes about death. Hey, Bill, if you were right here, you would have been killed. If not, live, dead, live, dead. And so, I mean, I think that's a good example where they're just sitting there taunting each other mercilessly to deal with the stress and strain of being in a forward combat area.
Right, Kronos says dark, sadistic humor is fun. And Popchak, he says you have to really embrace irreverence.
Yeah, and it's definitely easiest during dialogue scenes. So if you can add dialogue to cut tension, but definitely don't pull away from the scene. It definitely still has to flow. But those little moments, can give you're saying, your reader a chance to breathe. So it's like all this craziness is going on, and it's almost like you're holding your breath, and then dead, alive, dead type thing comes in. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's do this thing.
Yeah, I really appreciated military science fiction during all those battle scenes that can get heavy and can get long, to have some of the humor to break that up, and it just adds so much color. And then for romance, that's what I'm writing. I'm writing romance. Humor is great for helping the two main characters to develop their relationship together. Those scenes where they're flirting with each other, they're making jokes together. Think about your relationship with a significant other. So much of that cement that binds the two of you together is humor, the humor that the two of you have. So friendships, that's important in adventure stories. It's important in science fiction and action and thrillers, but also romance too. There's ways that humor can bind your characters together and just be really fun for your reader to see and to be a part of. All right, we need to get to the rule of cool. So finally, some more subjective things, even more subjective things that can increase reader satisfaction and make your readers happy. Can you explain to us the rule of cool, Jason?
Sure. The most shining example of the rule of cool is, without question, the AT-AT walkers, and they're not called AT-ATs. I will never call them that. The AT-AT walkers in the Battle of Hoth in Empire Strikes Back. They are completely ridiculous. They had no place strategically. You would not have something walking that big through a snow tundra. They would have been tracked vehicles, and yet they are basically one of the coolest, most recognizable vehicles in all of science fiction. Every single kid had one. In fact, I still have mine from 1980, whatever, that's sitting in 2 rooms over there that my daughter plays with. They are incredible, and they are an absolute perfect example of rule of cool in that you can do whatever you want in your book and get away with it if it follows the rule of cool. Tarantino is a big follower of the rule of cool, like everything that he does. So many, of course, there's Star Wars references. Come on, man. And I'll tell you why Shadow the Illustrator I use Star Wars references is because that's common ground. Everybody's seen Star Wars, so it's an easy way to explain stuff.
Or at least heard about it talked to the death.
Right. Yes. So there's tons of other examples in sci-fi where the rule of cool has come in and kind of saved the day, and made the show cool. Fifth Element is another good example of that. It shows just that the movie's ridiculous, but there's so many cool things in it where it gets away with it that you're like, yeah, okay, cool, I buy into that. The police officers, for example, in the beginning sequence, they're all like completely armored up. I mean, they're like huge beetles. There's no way police officers would be outfitted like that, and yet they look really cool with their big, ridiculous lights on their shoulders and the helmets and all that. I mean, how would they be able to move? But they look cool.
Yeah, when I read Galaxy's Edge books, I like them a lot because I feel like there's something cool and interesting and neat kind of on every page. Yeah.
And if you don't know, get eyeballs on it.
Yeah, I Rick Partlow, I agree with that too. Mecha are big examples of rule of cool. 100% agree. Yeah, they're totally ridiculous, yet they're cool. So we let them go with that. And the Fifth Element does rock.
All right. So what are some other things that readers really like? Here's one thing I saw a lot in your books is that readers like Schadenfreude. We like poetic justice. We like to see the bad guys get theirs in the end. I mean, not right away, right? Not immediately.
That would be a short book.
By the end, we like to see bullies get theirs. You had a lot of mockers, like characters who mocked someone else, particularly weak, or mocked someone who's like the reader. Like you had in your book, Americans get mocked by other characters who are much more powerful than they are and call them pathetic.
Yes.
So kind of like the strong, powerful characters in your book are calling the reader pathetic. And then it's the American underdog who's able to kind of like turn it on them. And that's the cool big twist.
Yeah.
It was extremely satisfying for me as an American reader. So if there are ways like to bring in Schadenfreude, I don't know if we should promote Schadenfreude, but poetic justice, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Readers love that feeling of poetic justice, or a lot of readers do. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the perfect example of that would be, it's not going to be a Star Wars reference, guys, is King Joffrey in Game of Thrones. I mean, how badly did we all want him to die? Really? You rolled your eyes at that?
Are you looking at me?
No, I'm looking at, yeah, there we go. How badly did you want him to die? Because he's just the most horrible villain, and he's just awful.
He's terrible. He's a terrible person.
It's such a wonderful, awesome death because he knows he's going to die, and it's public, it's in front of everybody. It's just a really gory, painful death. And it was great. I loved it, and so. You have to hate that villain. You have to really, really, really hate that villain with all your heart. And that, I think, really forces the reader to want to root for the protagonist. And so, it's almost cheating because you make the villains intentionally insulting, like you said, to the reader. They're assaulting my sensibilities and appealing on an emotional level. And so, I think that makes the end of the villain even that much more awesome.
Yeah, kicking puppies, beating the main character when they're down.
Yeah.
This stuff just makes them worse and worse and more villainous. And then when they get there, making up.
Hurting helpless people, stealing from helpless people, all kinds of stuff. You can make them really bad.
It's especially cool when it's the bad guy's own tendencies, their own tactics, their own evil tactics that they use to take advantage of others. That is part of their undoing, right? Like if they're selfishly motivated and they use that to cheat, and their cheat ends up coming back on their own heads, we like that a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I would agree with that.
Subjective.
Yeah.
A lot of readers.
Yeah. I really hate bullies, and I hate people who, stole or didn't, or like the over promoted boss. Like, I guess The Office is an example. I never watched it much, but the guy who's in power, who has power over you, but he doesn't deserve it. He somehow got it, and he doesn't respect it. He doesn't respect you. He doesn't care. That because we've all had that jerk boss who he's only your boss because he didn't he didn't quit or get fired, and so through attrition he became your boss. And he tends to be really egotistical about it. So, start trying to encapsulate that into a character. I think if people can identify with the villains, not themselves, but in people that they've had to deal with, it's another subliminal connection that they have to root for the protagonist by hating that villain even more. And they almost don't know why they hate him. Just they hate him.
Right. So you could kind of take tendencies that tick you off in real life. I don't know. Maybe in your or in other people.
Yeah. If somebody's like really arrogant and just, ignorant and obnoxious and, sort of in your face about it, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's the catharsis of writing. Is like, oh, I can do something about it. I'm going to create somebody, and then I'm going to, shoot him in the head in front of all of his friends and family or something. So finally get his.
That's why you don't piss off a writer. Kill you in my next book.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that real estate agent. Did you ever show him? Hey.
Oh yeah, he comes over to my house every Christmas, because we had a nickname for all the houses we looked at, so we called it the Christmas House because it was Operation Steal Christmas, so that we could host Christmas for my whole family, which we do. So he thought that was hilarious, and so he comes over to our house every Christmas and gives us the White House Christmas ornament. So when he came over last year, I was like, hey, by the way, Todd, here's a book, and oh, by the way, the villain's modeled after you. So when you're reading the villain, that's you. That's actually you. I want you to read it in your voice, which I guess you would do anyway. But yeah, and he thought it was hilarious. He thought it was great. He's like, he couldn't wait to go read it. So
that's great.
Yeah.
I got to meet this guy.
Yeah.
Book for me.
If you need to buy a house in Northern Virginia, he got you.
I'll look him up. Okay, what else do we have? You put in the notes, creating a premise that makes the reader want to be in your story, or a premise that makes the reader think, what would I do if this were happening to me?
Yeah, I think we talked about that in the beginning, but yeah.
That's true.
For sure. I mean, if you're stuck about a premise for your book, which is really important to have, just write a world that you want to go to. I mean, anything, it doesn't matter. If it's the land of chocolate that Homer wanted to go to when the Germans were going to buy the plant in Simpsons, write about that. I mean, it's your story.
So take things that you love, put them in your book, including if it's things that you hate.
Yeah.
Put them in the book and then have it crash.
Yeah. I mean, I love cyberpunk. I love the whole idea behind cyberpunk, and that's why I have a ton of cyberpunk elements in my books, because that whole subgenre fascinates me to no end.
And it all comes down to, know what genre you're going for. Know what genres you want to mix together if you want to mix genres, because you can do that. But know what you're going for, and definitely have those characters in your head, be it that neighbor down the street that just drives you crazy. It's like, that's going to be my villain.
Yeah, or the henchman. Don't forget the henchman. Very important.
And the henchmen's, all the henchmen's. put a face to your characters. I know there's a lot of authors that they'll find pictures on Google, and they at least have, that a face to go with this imaginary person. You could use characters that are already in movies, like Jason was saying, because it's unique to your world. Change the name, don't give them the same situations, but a personality can always be used again.
One last point, shout out the illustrator. I have a story I want to write, and the character that would be considered the villain, I don't like him, but he's not the actual antagonist. Is that a bad way to set up a villain?
So I have to understand that better. Whenever a character be considered the villain, but don't like him, he's not the. So if he's the villain, how's he not the actual antagonist?
So is it like the one that you are almost like tricking the reader that this could be the villain, but then there's a reveal that there's an even villainary villain?
She says, I like to hate him. So he's a character that I enjoy hating. There
could definitely be a henchman, or somebody that the character has to deal with, and that creates tension. So it's not really a villain. It's just like a really obnoxious person that they have no choice, but they have to go interact with this individual for whatever reason, because they're the ones who have the key to get open to the gate, or they're the ones that have that key piece of information that's going to help you solve the crime. Yeah, I definitely agree with the local DMV Henchman Factory. Nice. That'd be a good short story, by the way. Henchman Factory.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just about henchmen. The henchman school.
Right.
The proving ground. They weren't good enough to be villains, so they're like lazy. Yeah.
Yes.
He's got this really cool hat he can throw and chop off the heads of statues, but he doesn't have the brains to put it to the big heist for Fort Knox together. He cheats at golf.
Those are the worst golf cheaters.
Yeah.
Well, those were some of our ideas for how to increase reader satisfaction. That's really just like the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more ways and ideas that we could have mentioned, and we'll get to on another night. But that is our show for tonight.
Yes, because we are a little bit over. We want to say again, thank you to Tough Luck, a YA action adventure urban fantasy saga of the Shamrock Samurai by Dean Floyd. Thank you so much. Go click that link and buy it because he's awesome. And also thank you, Jason, for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom. Can you let our viewers, listeners, and lovely keystrokers know where to find you?
Yeah, you can go to jasonwinn.com, just spelled like my name. Two N's. I use the proper I, W-I-N-N. Also, you could go search for Winn World, so WINNWORLD on Facebook, or I think I have an old Twitter account, but don't worry about that. It's basically me ranting about companies that did me wrong. Trying to get free stuff. Yeah. But yeah, check me out on Amazon. Just search for me on Amazon. You'll find me.
All right, people, go do that because he's been awesome and he's shared a lot of wisdom. So everyone in the live chat, YouTube viewers, podcast listeners, thank you for hanging out with us. Let us know what you thought about the show in the comments. Make sure to hit that thumbs up or give us a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Ding the bell so you always know when we have another show going on. For Lauren Moore, I am Kalene Williams. Thank you for joining us on your writer's journey. Be sure to check us out next week where we're going to talk about some reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium's The Writer's Journey. Good night, guys.
Good night.